going to get started. Welcome everyone. My name's Emma Simpkins. I am the Botanical Records and Conservation Specialist at Auckland Botanic Gardens, and I am the current chair of BCARM, Baganza's Collections and Records Management Group. Welcome to the July Plant Forum. It's really nice to see a new group of people that we haven't seen at forums before, and I think today's theme is a really exciting one. Today we are focusing on tree management, which I know is a challenge for many of us. It's always a challenge, doesn't matter what size your garden is or the resources you have. Trees are always changing and our management needs to stay ever evolving. So just a reminder, if you have any questions, comments, please feel free to share them in the chat. We're just introducing ourselves in there as well. It's great to know who you are and what kind of roles you're all involved in. Today we have two speakers, which I'm delighted to having join us today. Toby Chapman from Christchurch City Council and Ian Allen from Blue Mountains Toma. And then we are going to have a bit of a IrisBG pre-recorded demo to show what features in IrisBG can be used for tree management. And so there'll be ample time for questions and a bit of discussion. So as you're listening, feel free to put those questions in the chat or save them up for after the presentations. So I'm going to hand over to Toby to get us started.
Thanks, Emma. Hello, everyone. My name is Toby. I'm just going to share my screen. Go. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Yep. Perfect. Cool. So today I'm going to be speaking about a tree policy that was recently adopted by Christchurch City Council. So the tree policy is focused on a council level. It does apply to the Botanic Gardens because that is a council park. It's not solely focused on the Botanic Gardens, but I think some of the concepts will be relatable. And my understanding is other people within this this chat will also be working at Botanic Gardens that are part of councils as well. So as mentioned, the tree policy was adopted in March 2021. The purpose of the tree policy was to provide guidance for basically tree management for all trees located on land owned by council or land that is looked after by council. We're also creating or developing an urban forest plan. The focus of the urban forest plan will be more on canopy cover across the city, things like growing trees across our city. Sorry, my kids are slamming on the door, but someone's taken them away. Very distracting. So the urban forest plan is more focused on the collective. It'll be focused on canopy cover targets, growing canopy cover, and things like diversity of species. The focus of the tree policy is really on that day-to-day management of individual trees. It's there to provide guidance for decision making, create a consistent approach to tree management. So we did have inconsistencies depending on who was managing what areas or which community boards. So this creates a consistent approach, helps to meet council's legal requirements for how risk posed by trees are managed, facilitate the council's ability to meet other plans and strategies, and it needs to be broad enough to cover a majority of scenarios. I always say a majority of scenarios. I think if you're trying to cover all scenarios, either your document's going to be very long or it's never going to be finished, or by trying to address those real outliers, you can have consequences on a majority of the other scenarios. So when I came on board, which wasn't long ago, to Christchurch City Council, 2.5 years ago, the tree policy had been worked on for about 10 or 15 years. So we didn't have a tree policy at Christchurch City Council. There was a draft, it had never been adopted. There was a lot of history with the document. There was a lot of good stuff in there. There were a lot of people who had worked on it. So the first thing I did was I went through essentially all the historic documents to see what they'd kind of got to what the working groups had come up with and what the community had kind of decided that was important. Something just popped up on my screen. What I wanted to get out of it is I wanted to make sure that the policy had clear policy statements within the document to provide easy reading, clear direction, and could be referenced. What I mean by that is I've picked up a lot of policy documents that are very text heavy. They're very long-winded, and either they're really technical or they're just really long. There's good stuff in them, but it's often hard to find it and it's really hard to reference it. So I wanted to make sure the document that we had was easy to reference and easy to understand.
Sorry,
I wanted
Toby,
to ensure
just
that.
lost your PowerPoint. Sorry, before we carry
Oh,
on.
have you?
Yeah.
That explains why everything went weird on my screen. Okay. Is that back now? Cool.
Yep.
Sorry about that. Yep. We wanted to ensure that it complements what is likely to be developed in the urban forest plan, which we're currently working on. And we wanted to make sure it worked across all divisions of council and community boards. So what I quickly discovered is trees are very important to me. The policy is very much focused on trees. And from my point of view, it was about how to protect and maintain the trees. Other departments, such as Transport and Three Waters, trees are kind of a subsidiary of what they do. They're often seen as getting in the way, and they wanted something to give them clear direction on how they work around trees. So it was making sure that the tree policy addressed all of that. So a quick overview of what came out of it. So the tree policy covers 4 key components to tree management. So you've got your tree planting, your tree maintenance, your protection of trees during construction and development, and your tree removal. The tree policy ended up around 11 pages long. If you take out glossaries, contents pages, it's about 9 pages, which was really good. It's written in English, and best of all, it's actually being used. Most departments are picking it up. Community boards are understanding it, and the actual local community. So covering the whole tree policy is quite a big topic. We haven't got a huge amount of time. So what I've done is I just thought, here's a quick overview of it before I move on to the next slide. So just as I mentioned, it's fairly simple. So it covers those 4 topics. So when we come to tree removal, got a nice simple introduction to why we need to remove trees. And then there's these really clear policy statements. So it's really simple for someone to go to it and go, oh, yep, I've got a tree that's structurally unsound. Cool. That meets 4.1 of the policy statement. We can remove it under the tree policy. And it's really good to lead. It's really simple to lead people to those parts. So because we've got quite a lot to cover and not a lot of time, what I thought I'd do is just plucked out bits of the tree policy which I consider big wins as far as tree management goes and clarity. So I've just got a few of those. So within the planting section 1.2, all projects on council land will actively incorporate new planting locations and prioritise the retention of existing suitable locations. This may include, but is not limited to, installing underground services outside of grass berms to allow sufficient rooting environment for new trees. So there's 2 key components to this. One, it really highlights the issue of underground services being installed in our grass berms. We have a lot of trouble planting street trees because we can't get past the services. Sometimes services do need to go in there, but often they go in there because it's cheaper. So this really highlighted that as that's not the way we want to go forward. The other thing that we often do is we protect trees that are existing, but we don't often look at the planting locations because there's no tree there. So an example of this is we had a really wide berm in Christchurch, and they're putting a cycleway through it. Every time they came to a tree, they shifted the pathway to the side to go around the tree, which was great. As soon as they went past the tree, they'd go straight back to the middle of the berm, which meant we couldn't plant anything. So using this, we were able to push the footpath all the way to the side and protect those planting spaces. For every tree removed, a minimum of 2 new trees will be planted with the projected canopy cover replaced within 20 years. So the 2 trees for every 1 got added at the 11th hour, not by me, by someone else, which is great. I'm all for it. But the canopy cover was the one that I really wanted to go in there, because what I was seeing is, for example, a large oak being removed and maybe a smaller cherry put in. So we were starting to lose our canopy cover even though we were replacing trees. So it was to try and counter that. Pruning trees for power lines. So we had a number of trees that were considered non-compliant because they were close to power lines. This here basically says we acknowledge that sometimes this will happen, but where it's going to cause harm to a tree that we class as significant, we'll go to the network owner to explore alternatives, and that's actually happening. So we haven't bundled wires, but they're looking at if the tree's too close to, say, a line that just runs the lighting, then they're not too concerned about it and things like that. They're moving cross arms. So that's opened up a whole new conversation. That conversation may have happened without this, but it certainly helps facilitate that. We will not undertake full height reduction pruning to alleviate tree issues such as shading or debris or establishment, retention, or enhancement of views. So full height reduction is another way of saying we won't top our trees, which I think it's fairly well known that topping is not great for trees, and we just needed something in there so we can go back to the public, because we do often get asked if we can cut the top out of trees. So, yeah. A tree protection management plan. So a tree protection management plan is a plan for how you're going to construct around a tree to ensure that you don't cause unnecessary damage to the tree. So prior to the tree policy coming in, we had a district plan, which is our regulatory framework. We had our specification standards, which all covered certain scenarios, but there were a lot of loopholes. There were a lot of areas that people didn't have to abide by the district plan because they had exemptions. And our standards only applied to council projects. So this was kind of a catch-all to go, regardless of who you are or what you're doing, you still have to provide a tree protection management plan for working around our trees. Development projects on land we own and or look after will prioritise the retention of mature trees through all aspects of the project. So this was one highlighting where a mature tree is, but another thing we often did when we came to projects is we looked at the health of the tree and we determined what trees were going to be retained based on the health of the tree, which meant that some of our mature trees that were coming to the end of their life or that wouldn't be considered in the best health were being removed. What we were failing to acknowledge is the space that tree took up. So when we removed that mature tree, we didn't have the ability to plant something else in that space. So it was important to me that we acknowledge those mature trees and we tried to retain them right from the planning stage throughout the project. I'm getting a bit late on time. So tree removal, we split tree removal into two key components. So we've got removal by council, and then we've got residents' requests for removal. So removal by council are the things that we do for our general management of our trees. Residents' request is where things get a bit hairy. We won't go into that here because that's a big topic in itself, but we address that as well. So a couple of things for tree removals. So we highlighted what would happen in the past is you get a plan and they'd acknowledge that trees were being removed to facilitate a project, but they were just circles on the plan. We never really required them to show how they were trying to retain the tree or the value of the tree that it provided versus the value of the project. So that's starting to come through now. So when a project goes to a community board or comes to a council staff officer to approve the removal, we're actually getting them to show everything that they did to try and retain the tree. And also they have to justify the value of the project versus the loss of the tree. And we have had valuations done on trees as well to show that, you know, to try and highlight the cost of these trees and the significance that is lost. And then because this is a talk for the Botanic Gardens, I thought it was important to include 4.12, which is a tree may be removed if the tree is located in the Christchurch Botanic Gardens and felling is required in order to protect or enhance the botanic collections or reduce species duplication in accordance with the provisions of the Christchurch Botanic Gardens Management Plan. So I highlighted earlier removal requests from the public. So they can become really complicated. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to create a really clear channel for the public to put in a request for removal and how that would go through the process to see if it would be approved. So in Christchurch, staff have the ability to remove trees that are basically, generally they're either structurally unsound or they're in declining health. If they're a healthy tree and there's nothing wrong with it, we very rarely don't actually have the ability to approve a removal anyway. It goes to the local community board. So what was happening was the local community board were getting these requests, but they didn't know how to determine whether they should approve it or not. What we did was we looked at a lot of the removals and we split them into 3 different categories. So human health, so that's things like allergies. We get that a lot with silver birches, removal of trees because they're causing health issues. Property damage, so when the damage isn't significant, so it wouldn't meet staff's, as staff, we're not allowed to approve removal of the tree unless the damage is significant. So if the damage is some minor cracking, then it wouldn't be classed as significant. And then other issues, which is kind of a catch-all. And each of those categories have some really clear definitions and clear criteria of how they get met. Cool. And that was me, but I believe we're going to go through the other talk and then do questions.
Yep, I think so. Thank you, Toby. That was really interesting, and I'm sure a lot of that does apply to other gardens, especially those that might be managing multiple sites, things like that. So we will now hand over to Ian to talk about tree management in Botanic Garden.
Great, thanks Toby, thanks Emma. Oh, that was great, Toby, and I hope some things segue into what I'm going to talk about. Yeah, I'm Ian Allen. I'm the Supervisor of Natural Areas and Arboriculture at the Blue Mountains Botanic Gardens. I'll just share my screen as well. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, so what I'm hoping to talk about today is, managing our trees for the future and what best practice Botanic Gardens tree management looks like, and how we can get there. There's a lot of slides here. It's pretty rapid fire. As some of you know, you might remember me from the time I locked a whole lot of people in a room at BCARM in New Zealand and talked for 45 minutes without toilet breaks or water, but it won't be like that this time. I just want to really foster discussion. There's wonderful things happening in the world of tree management and in the world of living collection management that all ties into some really great things for the future. So yeah, I'm just going to fire through a bunch of slides, and there's some text, there's lots of pictures, but hopefully it gets us all talking, and when I can catch up with a lot of you at the Congress later in the year, we can keep this going in the right direction. So I'll get stuck into it. Okay, so as many of you know, there are organisations like Global Trees Campaign that runs through BGCI and ArbNet through the Morton Arboretum, and of course the IUCN. Peer-reviewed research says that it's estimated that over 8,000 tree taxa, which is 10%, are threatened with extinction. So we all know trees are important, and it's part of the mission of Botanic Gardens to conserve them. Further work from the Global Trees Campaign, and I'll reference some work by these guys a few times, and in particular, I think it's Nicole Cavender, which is absolutely wonderful research. They've demonstrated that, trees provide meet 15 of the 17 internationally supported UN Sustainable Development Goals. These things are really important for things that Toby's just been talking about with urban forest development, and that shift in arboriculture into, rather than just tree management, street tree management, and talking about these things in terms of urban forestry are really important. But one thing that I want to talk about is, Botanic Gardens, I know a lot of you sit in local government or municipal management. Some organisations like us at the Blue Mountains, we actually sit under the state government umbrella in Australia, but we are also subject to similar things to these urban forestry goals. Our other partner gardens, the Australian Botanic Gardens at Mount Annan, Western Sydney Development is huge, and those guys are under a lot of pressure to be involved in tree planting and urban forest development initiatives, which are wonderful. They're all excellent things to meet some of those UN Sustainable Development Goals and the roles of Botanic Gardens. But we're also a little different to urban forest management, and I think we need to really think about that and what Botanic Gardens are that makes them different. It's low-hanging fruit. We often get caught up in canopy targets and planting initiatives, but we have our living collections to manage. We have green space to manage that's very different, and we need to really think a bit deeper as to how we set intelligent goals and management plans for our tree use. And again, I think I'm her biggest fan, Nicole Cavender. These guys have done some other work, which I'll show later, where they wrote a paper on intersecting urban forestry and botanic gardens to address big city challenges for healthier trees, people and cities. And in that, they've highlighted very clearly that there needs to be a greater call for action for Botanic Gardens to play a role in this, and particularly to look at how we can do that. And I encourage you all, I'll touch on some places as to where to find these resources, but this paper in particular, they've put together a table with some very clear actions on how we can play roles in that. And it's things like using our living collections to inform street tree plantings and to work with the councils and other partners, but also to work together to ensure that our living collection data and things like that form huge data sets to inform science around the world and to inform education and to help drive the promotion of the benefits of trees and the changing ways we're thinking about urban forest management. So yeah, again, I won't go into the details, but it's wonderful. And if you have a look in there, you'll find some great things that tie into our plans. I put this in because this is the classic thing. We talk a lot about plant blindness. A lot of people see the views, certainly in urban forest. Some people see the trees, but not many people see the arborist hiding in the shade over there in the right. This is from our site. I'm a huge, anyone that listens to me talk for 5 minutes will hear me fly the flag of arboriculture, where as a profession, it's come on leaps and bounds from literally within 15 to 20 years, we're still called tree loppers by a lot of people. The professionalism and the level of education, science and research that is supporting our profession and driving it is just come on leaps and bounds these days. And I think we really need to acknowledge that. I think when I did a workshop a couple of years ago at BCARM, I asked everyone who had full-time arborists on their staff and dedicated arb teams and what levels of arborists. And it was great to see in the chat in this session today, there's lots of arborists here, but there's also lots of gardens that need arborists. And we need to drive the professionalism of that and aim for best practice. Now, some of you know about ArbNet. So ArbNet is a collective of and a network of arboretums that runs through the Morton Botanic Gardens in the US, and the Global Trees Campaign and BGCI are all involved in it. And that's their mission right there. It's absolute. They run an accreditation scheme. And I know a lot of people, when we go through these things, our bosses, people ask, what are the benefits of accreditation or of memberships? It's free, so that's one answer. But we went through this process, and they offer several levels of accreditation depending on what your organisation does. And unfortunately, I think this is a great area for us to improve in BCARM, is these are the only botanic gardens in the network that are on their register as being accredited. And the table over on the right-hand side of my screen is essentially for each level. So you can go into that, and even if you're just a very small garden or a very small arboretum and you only have a plan or not many staff, you can still attain level 1 accreditation. It doesn't give you a golden pass. It doesn't get you into anything that you can't access without the accreditation. But I think these things, if we adopt them, they're wonderful. They help drive the professionalism of what we're doing, and they help put trees at the forefront of what we do, which is a huge thing when we put it into the context of global tree conservation and urban forest management. So I encourage everybody to jump on that. And just by doing the process, we had to pull together a lot of information about our collections or our resources or our programs. And that information and the process has given us a great backbone to now drive towards tree management and goal setting around all of this, because we know what we do or don't have, and we know where we need to put it and which way to direct it. So overall, globally, that's just some more of their stats on their accreditation. And again, there's only 39 Arboreta around the world that have their level 4 accreditation at the moment. So great room for people to get involved and think about what they can do to improve and bump up the levels like a video game. And there's just the map. So don't worry, New Zealand, friends across the ditch, you guys are, you've got 2 there. I think it's the National Arboretum up in the north, and then I think, is it Christchurch down the bottom? Sorry, or Dunedin, sorry. And yeah, we've got Butteree and our Centennial Park are no longer in it, but Butteree and our 3 gardens up here and someone else that I forgot, sorry. So then on to best practice tree management. Look, this isn't out of a textbook. This is something that we all talk about it. What is best practice? What we need to define it. We need to really think about what it means. I just broke it down into a bit of a cycle, and I could exhaust this. This could go on and on and on. You could keep adding things into it. Like Toby said, if you go too deep into it, you'll never complete it. But really thinking about planning, there's several things there. I'll touch on these in my slides, so I won't dwell on all the text on this slide. Our living collection strategies, our policies, our tree management stuff, our conservation goals and monitoring, we need to think about those. We need to have deep discussions about them early on before we then move into all the rest. Growing, so if you talk to any arborist, what a really big priority for us is tree stock selection, is how we grow trees from the very beginning. Trees fall over. Unlike small shrubs, when it doesn't really matter if something's been pot bound or poorly grown, if trees are going to do all these wonderful things for us and provide all these benefits in the long term, we need to get them right at the beginning. There's lots of wonderful work on genetic diversity, things I'll touch on shortly. Maintaining our trees, that's the day-to-day work of our arborists. We're science-based, there's a lot of things there. We need to do that. Our collecting and recording of data, that's the linchpin for so much with Botanic Gardens. I'll go into some things about that a bit later. The balancing risk and benefits, and some of you would have heard me talk at BCARMs before. I'm not going to dwell on that in today's presentation. The risk management stuff can be very dry. I'm sick of being the safety guy. It's part of what we do, but more and more the change in arboriculture is about balancing that against the wonderful benefits that we get from trees. So I'll go through that a bit as well. And then there's the communicating all of this, communicating through our engagement teams and media teams, what we do, all the wonderful work that our teams do, our gardens do, and our goals, and then the benefits of trees. So like I said, with the planning, please look into ArbNet has a wonderful resource page on its website. Just Google ArbNet and have a look at their resources. There are so many great resources and examples of planning documents and frameworks, BGCI guidelines, all sorts of things. Again, look into Global Trees campaign, great resources on their website. And of course, we all know about the IUCN red listing processes, and these things can inform our living collection policies and strategies. I know a lot of gardens are working on those at the moment. There's a big change. Our organisation is driving really hard to have a new living collection policy and strategy by the end of the year. And we've talked about specifically highlighting trees individually as something to stand out. And part of that is because of the long-term nature, how they affect, like Emma said, our gardens, they change, they're dynamic, but the benefits they confer to us and how they help us meet all these other wonderful goals, we think it's important to single them out in our strategies. Tree management plans, how we manage them, what we do, design. Succession is a big one. What's going to happen when the trees die? How are we going to replace them? How are we going to move on? And then sustainability, another thing our organisation is working on at the moment is sustainability, and canopy targets are a big one, but we are very, like I mentioned, we're very cautious about what targets we set with planting goals and canopy targets. Do we have the resources to manage them? Do they conflict with our other needs in our living collection management and our green space management? Standards and accreditation. Again, we think it's really important. ARBNet, all these things, BGCI accreditation, I think they should be part of our models. And we all know about climate change modelling. The wonderful work that Peter and his team had done at RBGV, and that was a wonderful workshop. That was where I learnt what a workshop was, unlike my 45-minute lecture at the last BCARM's network. I think that's really important, and there's some great stuff about disaster planning that we need to think about with the increased nature of storms, drought, and floods and fires and things. As you know, Botanic Gardens, Blue Mountains Botanic Gardens was affected by the bushfires here, and we've learned a lot about that, and we've got to incorporate that into our future planning. And then there's a couple of things here. I'll get into them a bit later, but valuation in insurance is one of the big things we learnt from that. We need data, we need information on our trees. We all know the value of our trees, but it's a highly subjective thing when it comes to seeking insurance coverage for loss or damage. We all know budgets are tight. It's hard to get money for these things. You need to incorporate it early in your planning, and you need to think about insurance policies and discussions with your insurers about what they will pay for and the methods that you'll use to value things. I'll touch on that a bit later. And then, of course, goals and monitoring. Smart goals, we need to think about those really wisely. How do we measure success? And I don't have all the answers for that, but that's not what today's about. Again, making sure things relate to things like the red list. There's lots of low-hanging fruit ways to prioritise your collection goals for trees, and we all have finite room in our collections for trees. So these are a great place to start and look at priority taxa to add. Something I just came from an ARB working group meeting this morning, and we talked about this specifically, is we all have this constant mention of tree significance and people debate it. There's a lot of subjectivity to it, but there's lots of things in arboriculture, from tree education at the diploma level in Australia. I'm not sure about New Zealand, but there are some known methods for doing this. It's essentially going to be a product of combining a landscape amenity value rating, a heritage and cultural value, a condition rating, and an ecological value. But for us in Botanic Gardens, we need to really think about the value to our living collection. And that's another modifier that we would then add on to that baseline value. And that's the sort of way to do it. We need to define these things and put criteria to it so that we can all agree on whether a tree is significant, whether a tree can be cut down, or whether a tree needs to be managed into being a veteran tree and kept in the landscape. So unfortunately, we're all lagging behind on how we quantify the benefits of a tree as well, which is something else we can consider in significance ratings. And then I'll start to fly through these slides now, because that was the more technical stuff. But technology, we've got to think about the future. GIS platforming is a huge one. There's lots of things in our record systems like Iris that they're not going to fit into that, but our soil management, our water management, all our tree failure records, all sorts of things. Think about those things. Connectivity, the future is in tablets. The future is absolutely in our phones. So we need to think about whether we've got the things set up in our gardens to manage that. And I'll touch on LiDAR and aerial road vehicle analysis later, and spectral analysis of vitality, and of course drones. So we've got to think about that. We've got to look at technology and be preempting it. So onto the growing tree selection. In Australia, it was a thing where they used to call it the longest Australian standard that never became a standard. Finally, they managed to develop the Australian standard for tree stock for landscape use, which was a diplomatic agreement on what used to be NatSpec. That sets the quality of how our trees are grown, and we should all adopt these standards and try and make sure our nurseries are doing it. We need to make sure they also have formative pruning, planting specifications. We need to work with our scientists to work on the right genetic combinations on what to prop from. So what we have in our collection is of value when we look at seed and distributing these things around the world or to partner gardens. And we need to think about safeguarding collections. As I mentioned, we were impacted by the bushfires and we lost a lot of North American trees that were wild collected, and we need to think about where we plant them in our gardens, and we need to think about who we can share material with to ensure that we can get those things back when we lose them. I just want to touch on this. These things aren't new. Stock selection. So as you'll see, this is a wonderful book from 1852. And this talks about transplanting trees and all sorts of stuff. but I just love that there's a chapter in it called Evils Arising from Pot Culture of Such Plants as Should Ultimately Become Trees. And they drew root-bound plants. They knew about them. We've learnt a lot. These are photos from our wonderful work that our horticultural science assistant Maureen Phelan did for the Wallamai Pine translocation work that's been publicised over the last couple of years. Using different material from the plant, growing them in a way. We worked with the scientists. Our arborists provided great advice to ensure that these plants were the best possible plants to go into the wild to make sure that they were going to survive and live for hopefully hundreds of years. And that I just think is wonderful to look at the little root development on that. That's excellent. So when we come to maintaining, Arb Australia has set these wonderful things. They've been working for years in industry to develop these minimum industry standards. There are industry standards on environmental tree management, all sorts of technical arborist work like tying knots and tree assessment and all sorts of things. You can buy them in a suite of documents from Arboriculture Australia's website. And again, they're a great place for your arborists to look at to set baseline standards. It's also really important for us to make sure we have the right skill levels of staff. Diploma level qualified staff are just amazingly educated at the moment. There's even people that got associate diplomas from Burnley University in Australia. And we need to make sure we develop them and make sure their ongoing professional development happens. So send them to conferences. The ARB conference in Australia is a fantastically well-run thing that's gone for years, and it's worth sending people to. And then practicing science-based arboriculture. Like I mentioned, these things aren't new. We've done them forever. And they're most of the practices that we fight for as arborists have sound backing in peer-reviewed literature. And then tree protection. Toby touched on that, and I'll touch on it a bit more later. So maintaining our trees, there's the day-to-day work of our arborists. But our guys keep up on their professional development through things like this. So like I mentioned, the industry standards on the right over there, but also the ISA in America has a great load of free resources. They have this publication called Arborist News that's free, and they run these CEUs, so these education units that our arborists often download these and read them. So there was one back in sometime on nursery production systems and their impact on tree growth. There's all sorts of things on tree fungi, all sorts, and again, reading them, keeping up on it. It's constantly evolving, and it sort of, arboriculture is at the pointy end of sort of this scientific advancement through all the work out of America and Europe, and Australia's got a bit to go, but hopefully our botanic gardens can play a role in providing data and publication there. And that's what we do. We do think this is radial trenching or vertical mulching that we've done to decompact a tree. That's based on peer-reviewed research that's one of the best ways to decompact soil around a tree. The Code-It model, some people don't know about it. I'm always surprised how many of our horticulturists don't know about this. This is work from a guy called Alexander Shigo, and he developed this model for trees in 1977. I didn't just put this in because of the beautiful watercolor plates, but I just wanted to highlight and reinforce again that our arborists are building off the shoulders of giants. They're doing things, and often they're fighting to have these concepts accepted by other departments in our own organisations or people, or the general public. And like I said, even our horticulturists don't understand how the trees work. And it cycles back to things as simple as the decay of that wood, and the decomposed wood then provides nourishment for the trees. So we need to make sure science supports why we mulch the trees and everything. And there's some more examples of papers, hardware installation in trees. There's even a paper on the ISA website about the effects of cutting patterns from different pruning shears and which ones are the best to allow the branches to occlude properly. And that, like Emma had touched on earlier, our trees are dynamic. They loom over so much of the rest of our living collections and gardens. We need to make sure that we're thinking about that and how the maintenance of them affects everything else there. And as I said, Toby touched on tree protection. It's the arborist's lament. We need to make sure that our own organisations are being leaders in design and architecture, when we're building projects, we need to try to change the focus where it's not our arborists fighting for the best result for trees. It's our organisations taking the lead and ensuring that there's sympathetic design and architecture that gets the best result from the trees from the very beginning. And if we can model that in our gardens, we can absolutely influence urban design and all these other things so that our trees are long-lived. We adhere to the Australian Standard of Trees on Development, and that's a table out of it. If we follow that process, I won't dwell on it, but if we follow that process, then we'll get great results for the trees. And it's all about assessing trees before we design and then designing around that. So there's a little win that we had. Not everything's perfect, but these are some big remnant Eucalyptus fastigatas on our site. We needed to build a picnic shelter here. And as you'll see down on the right-hand side, our arborists managed to get the design changed with support from our curator manager to make sure there was a pier and beam footing under this suspended slab rather than intersecting straight across the root zone of that tree. And whilst sure it wasn't perfect, that's the kind of thing we all need to strive for, and hopefully we can get more wins like that. Had a great discussion again this morning with our arborists about exactly this. When we think about record management and data collection, there's going to be some stuff about Iris coming up after me, but we need to ask, what are we actually collecting our data for? It's not just a archivist thing of collecting collection records. Tree data is incredibly useful, and because trees live for so long and stay in the landscape for so long, if we record the right data and the right measurements, the tree history, all sorts of things, that data set in 100 years of a tree's life becomes immensely powerful. And we need to really think about that. And those are the things we need to think about. This is a sequoia in our garden. We don't have, 30 years, our garden's 35 years this year. We don't have accurate measurement data. It would be wonderful to have shown the last 30 years of measurement data on this against climate, like rainfall data and other things, so that we could see really cool things about the effects of climate change, but we unfortunately don't have that, and we're trying to set the platform up so that we have that in future. Tree failure records are really important. We've all heard certain tree species deemed to be widow makers, and there's not enough information out there in the world about each species and whether they actually do have a higher chance of breaking or not, or what other things might influence that. So, and we need to know about tree history. Some tree history we'd rather forget, probably like this one, but we all need to know when things were planted. We need to know what's happened to them, and those things, again, add to the data so that we can make inference about tree growth, tree success, tree failure, and again, inform urban forest management and all these other things. These are the things our gardens can set up. Another example, we didn't actually have much information on the effects of fire on conifers, and a lot of our conifers that were impacted by the bushfires, we simply didn't know whether or not they were going to live or resprout or recruit. And the best we could find was a small PDF on the International Conifer Society, where there was just a list of anecdotal evidence about which conifers were resprouters or not. So we can add to that and improve it. Now, this one's about pathology. We need to make sure we record pathology information. And again, this is part of the being global. This is from the International Plant Sentinel Network. This is a pro forma that they have available on their webpage, and being a part, using our living collections as plant sentinels. I think for New Zealand and Australia, it's really important. We're island nations, and if pests and pathogens are coming into our trees, there's huge, and some of them absolutely have impact on industry, forestry industry and things in our countries. So we can play a role there as well. And this can easily be added as a reference, attached to items in record systems, and we can work off that. And this is some work that Professor Brett Summerall did with that Sentinel network, just looking at some inspections on our site, and we record those in Iris, and he actually identified a species of Phytophthora that we didn't think we had, potentially even in the country. And it was a low risk one, but it's something that's triggered some response from us at the moment, and we're able to record it. And the other ones are phenology. You know, look at this, the cones and the on a Wollemi pine, we don't have accurate data about when the best times to collect or to pollinate are. And we're working with our scientists on some pollination experiments at the moment. And we'd love to have had really accurate records over that so that we could give them an informed time as to when to plan their experiments, but we can get there. And then there's some of the pollination work, and there's some of the recording of the responses from the natural disaster, the bushfire impacts on our Wollemi pines. So we need to record those things in our records. And of course, seed and material collection. Now, those things all tie in, like I said, to soil and climate information. We can't necessarily record those in IrisBG or some other systems, but we're all starting to be of the opinion that GIS platforming is where we all need to go with that. The power of spatial information is just incredible, and that's the way we'll be able to sort of future-proof all of this and provide incredible information for the future. So we've had soil profiling done of the site up here so that we can actually be accurate about where all the different parts of our site and what the soil is. And unfortunately, we've lost track of some of our weather systems just through outdated weather stations, but trying to make sure we keep accurate localized rainfall and weather data. And that plays into plant appraisal. Like I mentioned before, we should be able to value our collections. There's several methods in Australia. There's the Thayer method. There's been a Burnley method. The US ISA has a guide for plant appraisal, which is there on the right. That's referenced in a BGCI document about technical review into the susceptibility of botanic gardens to natural disasters. And we need to look at that and think about how we value our collections. We have, like I mentioned, from the bushfires, it's an ongoing saga for us dealing with the insurers to try and get some of the value of our lost trees accounted for. And without detailed data, it's very hard to calculate that. So I suggest everybody thinks about that. And of course, now risk assessment. Like I said, I don't want to dwell on this, but we have to carry out risk assessments and we need to record them, and I'll touch on that. So again, it's all about balancing the tree risk and benefits. We need to do that so we can maintain and increase and promote the benefits of our trees and not get lost into tree risk is actually overstated quite often, and some of you would have heard me talk about that. We do have a higher societal expectation on us because we manage trees and gardens. People expect us to not have trees fall down on people. So we do have to manage that, but we need to not overdo it. And this is the thing out of the National Tree Safety Group in England, and it just puts it into context. And this is all about risk and benefit. The risk of death from trees in the UK, and this is a bit outdated, but it is around 1 in 10 million. And when we put that against other things that don't provide anywhere near the same benefits to us and society, it's quite low, and we need to think about that. And again, so then it's more about the benefits. We need to change the language and frame it around the benefits of all these trees. All of these things from the Planet Arc work are all peer-reviewed. They're all supported, and they're wonderful. We all know them. I'm preaching to the choir, but we need to fly that flag, and Botanic Gardens need to play a bigger role in that, because we can actually quantify those benefits. The iTree canopy stuff and iTree, look this up, Google it. It's wonderful. They also they have a suite of tools, so you can calculate canopy cover and quantify benefits from your trees. You can also quantify ecosystem services from your trees using a different suite of software that they have, and it's all peer reviewed, probably made by number crunchers and boffins that I would never even come close to understanding how it all works, but it's wonderful. We've done some of it, gives us canopy cover, then allows us for each of our sites to crunch a dollar value to the benefits that our tree collections provide. And we need to talk dollars and cents when we're convincing people to resource us and support us. And this is another thing that we all need to think about. For those of you that aren't arborists and aren't at the pointy end of it all, there's a big shift in how we think about trees and their value in the landscape. There was a term, a system got by a guy named Jeremy Barrell in the UK called, it used to be called SUL, Safe Useful Life Expectancy. They then dropped the S into Useful Life Expectancy, and it was a way of categorizing age, class, and the use of trees. That's changed so much that I think we need to, that's still used in a lot of language. It's a tempting thing to talk about so that we can categorize our trees and plan for their removal. But larger and more mature trees with fuller crowns provide so many more benefits and ecosystem services than smaller trees. We need to really think about how we maintain those trees in our landscape. Not every tree needs to be managed to be a veteran tree, but with a good significance rating, we need to think about it, because some trees, and certainly in your urban environments and the gardens that are in the middle of cities, those trees are doing incredible things. They're sequestering so much more carbon, providing so many more ecosystem services and habitat, that we need to really be careful about when we think about removing them just because they look, what some people would say, ugly. We need to help redefine how people perceive trees and how they look. And once people know about it, perhaps that tree, maybe without all its cabling and bracing, but it becomes beautiful rather than an eyesore to some people. And then we need to communicate. This was from when BCARM's conference in Adelaide several years ago. I love this sort of stuff. I just think it's so simple. Just all through their city in Adelaide, there's these tags on trees just saying, I'm a tree and I do these great things. And we can do so much more in the Botanic Garden space about that. A lot of us have great comms teams. There's great stories coming out of Victoria in the Botanic Gardener about the guys importing rare acorns from Quercus engelmannii. Our media team does a great job of working with people at Sydney Morning Herald to promote the work that we've been involved in with the Wollemi pines, but we can do a lot more. Our visitor experiences are the main way we do it. We need to have good interpretation. These are some of the oldest plantings of Wollemi pines in the world, and we're just about to revamp all our interpretation so that people know that some of those trees are the oldest plantings and that we're pretty sure one of them is the tallest one in cultivation anywhere in the world, and then tell the story of the Wollemi pine for those that don't know it. RBG Victoria, again, doing wonderfully different things when we know people have emotional connections to trees, and when one of their white oaks failed, they then set about a project to turn that into something to remember the tree, but also to ensure a sustainable use for it. And a lot of us know about Melbourne City Council's wonderful urban forest thing. And I've got this, we're just about near the end, and this is where they've got an online platform where all of their trees are mapped on a GIS platform. And that was where the great story about being able to email their trees came out. They had 70,000 trees, and instead of getting condition reports from the public, they got wonderful things like this. And I just needed to leave this in there because I particularly like the gloomy pun about being in a grassland. Because then that platforming leads us into the future of tree management. This isn't just some poxy 1980s film clip. This is what we need to really start thinking about when we talk about the future. I went to an arboriculture conference about 6 years ago. Professor Steve Bracks from the Fenner School of Arboriculture talked about their test forests in ANU in Canberra, and the idea of having virtual LiDAR models of our gardens. It's not far away from being very affordable for us all. Our gardens, the idea that through spectral analysis that we would be able to manage our trees from a desktop, we would be able to see tree vitality change, we would be able to see whether branches changed, whether there were broken branches. We'd be able to see all these wonderful things about our garden, and we'd also be able to create 3D models of our gardens. Not everybody is fortunate enough to be able to walk or access our gardens, and we could provide the ability for people of lesser socioeconomic situations and all sorts of things to actually tour our gardens. And we've got to think about how we set the future up for that and future-proof it. And then we all need to work together, and we need to talk and share. And everyone loves acronyms, so I'm not putting my hand up yet to fly to run this, but maybe at the conference later this year, a whole bunch of us can talk about this, and I'd love to get together with all the arborists, even if it's just over a beer, and start getting the ball rolling on how we all work together to align our practices and achieve wonderful things for the trees. So that's me.
Thank you, Ian. It was amazing. What a whirlwind of all sorts of things for us to digest. And there were some really pertinent points that I think applies to all gardens of different sizes and capacities, which is wonderful. I haven't got any questions in the chat at the moment, but what I'm going to do is play a pre-recorded demo of IrisBG, where it explores how you can use the tree kind of management function of it. So as you're watching, put any questions into the chat and we will answer those. Toby and Ian can answer those afterwards. So let me get this video playing. There we go. Hopefully you can hear it.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Emma, for inviting us to speak today. My name is Laura Knudsen Murray, and I am the GIS Coordinator and Community Outreach Assistant with IrisBG. I will be giving a presentation about the inspection module in IrisBG and how it pairs with Esri's field maps. For those of you who are unfamiliar with us, IrisBG is a comprehensive, integrated software solution that facilitates everyday work with botanical collections, whether it is accessioning, sharing plant material with other institutions, creating a virtual tour, or monitoring the health and maintenance needs of trees over time. IrisBG serves as a complete botanical collections management solution. IrisBG is a community of over 250 institutions worldwide, and 18 of the collections in Australia and New Zealand are managed with IrisBG. So to discover more about the collections in Australia, New Zealand, or anywhere in the world, visit our Garden Explorer website. I will start off by reiterating what many arborists hear often. If your garden doesn't have a tree risk management plan, it will likely be defined for you in court. No one wants that to happen, and that is why tree inspections that include risk management methodologies are critical. There are several risk management tools out there, and we are in dialogue with institutions all over the world, US, Europe, Australia, and others, about further improving the inspection screen so that it can support different risk management methodologies. We are very interested in hearing back from the community. Sydney and Ian, we are looking forward to continue our collaboration with you on improving these modules. Let's open up IrisBG and look at how some of these risk management categories can be added. Under the Definitions tab, look for code lists. I edited the inspection condition code list to match some of the risk tolerance categories, which will allow arborists to give each tree a determination level upon completing an inspection. Once you have your code list set, let's create an inspection. Navigate to the Events tab and select Inspections. For this inspection, I will be evaluating the Asura within the Japanese garden. It's critical to select the priority and owner so that you know whose inspection it is. So to populate the items within the inspection, click the ellipse under the item number. To do an advanced search to bring in a list, you can navigate to the taxon menu and select Acer. And to select the item location, you can choose an item location, which in our case was the Japanese garden, and then perform the search. It populates all of the accessions within those criteria. Don't forget to select all before you select and close, and then it populates your inspection list with the items that you are going to inspect. Go ahead and click Save. Now, I had already created this inspection, so I will not save this one. Navigating to the one that I had saved. So I would save this. And in a future release of IrisBG, we will be able to export this report. The fields, of course, can be filled in directly in IrisBG and exported via the reports for a detailed Excel file, or can be worked on directly. Next, I will give you a demonstration of how to conduct these inspections while in the garden using Esri's field maps. This feature will be coming soon in an IrisBG version update, where you'll be able to directly export your saved inspection into ArcGIS Online. The ArcGIS connector will export your saved inspection here to your ArcGIS portal as a feature layer that lives in the cloud. You are then able to create a map with a fillable form that can be used by anyone in the garden. The ArcGIS connector exports your saved inspection here to the portal as a feature layer that lives in the cloud. You are able to create maps with a fillable form that can be used by one or more arborists in the garden. You use this hosted feature layer to create a map. This map can be configured for on or offline use, and it will synchronize any edits that you or your fellow arborists make in the garden back to the cloud. And when you are completed, when the inspection is completed, the sync will also be The map that you configure can be used on or offline. It will synchronize any edits that you or your fellow arborists make back to the cloud. Now let's have a look at how the inspection fields that you saved will pop up in a fillable form for your arborists on their mobile device. Click on the map that you just made within the Field Maps application. And this is the hosted layer, and all of those fields that you are able to edit then populates within Field Maps. And we save this and it will appear on your mobile device. The Field Maps app works on both Android and iOS products. And now for a demonstration on how it works on a mobile device. This is an example on an iPhone. However, the application looks and feels the same on an Android device with more, or a tablet with more screen real estate. So when you enter into Field Maps, it shows all the maps available to your license. I have maps that are available for offline use. The one that we just created is available for online use. So when you are in the garden, there will be a green, blue locator dot that shows where you are. But since I am not, it does not show that, but it still works from remote locations. Some of the unique features of using field maps are being able to search by a session number or even a QR code. So if you are standing next to a label that has a QR code, it will pull up that record. You can also, if you do not have QR codes, you can also search by typing, or if you can scan the text on the tag. Sometimes it adds a space. There it is. To edit this field, you tap on the pencil button in the lower left-hand corner, and you'll notice that this particular record has a different icon, and that is because as you change the overall condition, the icon changes. So if it is not acceptable, it changes to red. But there are many fields that you can fill. You can add photos, check the label status if it is okay or not okay. You need to print a new label. Once you complete the inspection, you can mark that. Keep it open or exclude it. The status date is changeable. And enter in the age, the expected lifetime, any of the measurements that you take. If there is damage to root, stem, or branch, you can mark that. And also put in a work order. If there, through your inspection, you identify several accessions that need work, we'll create a list of those. You can also add comments up to 8,000 characters. When you are finished with your edits within this record, you can press submit, and it will save it up to the cloud. And all of these records will, as you move through the garden, the icons will change so that you know that you have assessed every tree that you need to, and the edits will be saved and then moved back into IrisBG with the ArcGIS connector. Thank you, and please contact us if you have any questions. We hope to see you at the 7th Botanic. Thank you. Please contact us.
Right, thanks everyone, and thanks to IrisBG for that demo. If you have any questions about IrisBG directly, feel free to get in touch with them. So I know we've gone a little bit over time, but are there any burning questions for our amazing speakers today? Please pop them in the chat or unmute yourself and feel free to ask away. Can't see many people's cameras today, so I can't see if you're waving at me, but if you don't have any burning questions, I'm sure our speakers won't mind if you reach out to me or to them directly, and they won't mind getting back to you. There's a lot of information there today, so you might be still digesting. No, I'm not seeing any questions, so we might just wrap up from here. I just want to say thanks again to Toby and Ian. Those are great talks, and my secret passion is like one day I'd love to do an arboriculture course and want to climb a tree. So you've really given me a little bit more fuel to pursue that at some stage. And I just want to mention the next plant forum for BCARM in August is on Myrtaceae ex situ collections. So there is upcoming a survey that we're interested in all BGANS members to participate in, looking at what ex situ collections we all hold that are threatened with myrtle rust. So keep an eye out for your emails. That should be coming out fairly soon, but we'll have a session in August to look at that survey, ask any questions. You might have had a chance to already do the survey and you might want to ask us further questions. And we've also got 2 speakers who will kind of package nicely how they've been preparing for myrtle rust, as well as someone who's actively dealing with myrtle rust in their kind of living collections. So that will be a really great forum, and it's probably our last forum before the Congress, which hopefully we'll see many of you there. So thank you all again for your time today. It's been wonderful having you, and look forward to seeing you at the next plant forum. See you, everyone.